Welcome back to the 7th grade Mustache. On today's episode, we'll be speaking about book burning. Warning, this episode will challenge your beliefs on creation and the nature of reality. Let us proceed. Okay, you often hear about Atlantis and Lemuria and these ancient civilizations. Well, you hear about Atlantis and Lemuria, but you don't hear about them enough. What has been pushed on us is this story that begins in the Garden of Eden. And this person begat that person, blah, blah, blah. There was a flood, washed away all the wickedness, and now we have modern history. Well, there is a lot of human history that happened way before that. And we have small glimpses into the deep, deep ancient history of the planet Earth and human civilizations. But you have to go and dig under some huge boulders to find this stuff because it has been purposely kept from the purview of the average person.
Look, hey, the deepest shit, sometimes people say shit, but you don't realize how deep it is unless I don't want to use the term initiated. I hate that damn term. But, prime example, one time when Farrakhan's talking about the Bible, he says the Bible is the story of the white man. And people don't get what he was saying. I'm like, he's dropping some knowledge. He's telling you that, hey, yeah, the reason the Bible is shaped the way it's shaped is because it's describing just one small portion of this whole society, where they came from and who their ancestors are. The rest of us have a different history, or there's more history involved. And the only reason that people even fall for this shit, like literally the Vatican literally tells you, oh, we only go back 6,000 years. But all the artifacts we find are way older than that. Now, you always hear them talk about Göbekli Tepe, which is supposed to be 12,000 years old. But how old are the pyramids? They tell you the pyramids are 5,000, 6,000 years old. So when they actually start carbonating some of the wood that's found, because you can't carbonate stone. So when they start carbonating the wood that's part of that surrounding area, the pyramids are much older than they thought. So the pyramids allegedly are 9,000 to 10,000 years old. Now, here's the part that blows everybody's mind. How old is the Sphinx? Sphinx, do your math. The Sphinx is 12,000 to 15,000 years old. So literally the Sphinx was there before the pyramids. Now, there's another motherfucker. The
Sphinx was there when it was a swamp.
The Sphinx was there when it was tropical. That is correct. Because they see the wearing on the Sphinx, and that wearing on the Sphinx, yes, it's water erosion, not wind erosion, which is what they're telling you is a desert. And you got to remember when they found the Sphinx and those pyramids by accident, they were covered with sand. All that's been excavated. Now the other portion that starts there's an issue out there where everything is messed up when you start finding out. So how old are the pyramids in Mesoamerica? Now, some people say those pyramids are older. Now, of course, we're told that they're not older. But when you start doing the math, there's this guy that was some kind of super genius. He was like 9 years old, and he was so smart that Albert Einstein wanted to meet him. I forget his name. Look up his name. And his theory, based on the mathematical equations that were necessary to build the pyramids, he said that the pyramids in Africa and the pyramids in Mesoamerica, which is Mexico, South America, and Central America, they were made by the same person. He said that the people who did now white folks love to try to throw in what's that big thing over there, the ziggurat, whatever it is over there in
ziggurat.
Yeah, Mesopotamia. Okay. And so white folks like to talk about Mesopotamia being the birthplace of civilization.
Okay. All right. Hold your fire.
I'm sorry, dude.
All
I wasn't.
Buckle up, motherfuckers, because it's about to get crazy. There was a book that was written by a Russian woman. Her name was H.P. Blavatsky. Helena Provinska Blavatsky. She wrote this book called The Secret Doctrine. Through speaking with shamans, people who are channelers, people who have come across ancient books that were considered to be destroyed in fires. She gathered all this information
were taboo,
and she wrote this book called The Sacred Doctrine. It speaks of the 5 root races. The 5 root races, the first was ethereal, pure energy, the sons of yoga. The Earth's moon was the entry portal into this plane of existence. The second race was produced by asexual reproduction of the first race. The second race then produced the third race. Each race had its own form of language. The first race did not speak words. It was mind-to-mind communication, or image-mind communication. It was not until the third race that language became vocal. So, you have the first, you have the second, you have the third. Now what's happening is, from the first race, it's born from the will of the Creator. So this first race was born out of the mind of God. And then from this process of asexual birth, or hatching in a way, it gave birth to the second race. Now, the time between each of these races and their evolution is hundreds of thousands of years. So this third race was somewhat close to humanity. They weren't quite Homo sapien, but they were very close to humanity. When I say that, I'm not talking about these people were primordial. No, that's not what I'm saying. These people were different. They were large in stature. They had massive psychic abilities. They did not have the encumbrances that normal man does today. And so they then beget the fourth race. But let me go back, because the third race was born of the second race by form of eggs. They were hatched. So it wasn't really until the third race that there was a male-female gender. This is strange, I know. But the fourth race is what begat the Lemurians and then the Atlanteans. And within that fourth race, the colors of different levels of melanin provided the different types of people. These people existed in a solid physical form after the fall of angelic beings and the war in heaven. The mythology of the Titans began in this era of the fourth race. The fallen angels, the demigod offspring, are also present in this fourth race. Now, the Lemurians built large cities using rare earth metals and crystalline structures. The Lemurian civilization was located 30 miles west of Easter Island in the Pacific Ocean. The Lemurian were much taller than modern man, 8 to 9 feet tall. The stature of mankind would continue to diminish until modern Earth time. Lemuria was eventually destroyed by fire and by lava floods, to be exact. So what they did is they used the lava, the molten energy from within the earth to construct these stone and crystalline cities out of the ocean. So an island formed, and then they used their technology to funnel this thermodynamic energy from deep inside the earth to spew more and create these spires, these skyscrapers made of lava rock and crystal. So this was Lemuria. Now, Lemuria was, as I said, destroyed by lava, by fire. But there was an offshoot. There was a colony in the Pacific Ocean. This would be the beginning of Atlantis. So when Lemuria fell, the remaining survivors and the people who were already on the Pacific Island colony of Atlantis became the civilization of Atlantis. So mankind grows smaller in size, living shorter lives in each successive generation. You can see this in the modern man. All you have to do is look at photographs of your grandfather and listen to his stories about the life that he lived, the way he used his personal power, and how strong his handshake is for an old man. There's a saying, your handshake is half as strong as your grandfather's handshake, and his is half as strong as his grandfather's handshake. What that saying is getting at is that we are constantly going down in strength, in size, in humanity. Now, there's people like, well, you got LeBron James and Yao Ming and all these huge people. Those people would be midgets compared to the men that occupied Lemuria and Atlantis. because these are the people that existed right after the Great Fall. So that's when shit was still popping. And then it just starts to taper off, and it's like this bell curve. It just keeps going down. All right. Atlantis existed for tens of thousands of years before the Jews of the Bible inhabited the earth. Atlantis was eventually destroyed by water, and the refugees settled in Egypt, Ghana, and the Andes Mountains in South America. This began the story of the fifth root race of Homo sapien sapien.
Hey, hold on. While you were talking, I was trying to find which bishop is the one that burned those books. Mayan secret text. The indigenous Mayas that the Catholic Bishop Diego de Landa encountered in the Yucatan Peninsula in the 16th century came to trust him so much that they shared with him some special sacred writings preserved on deerskin and Mayan hieroglyphics. These books were jealously guarded, secret and exclusive possessions, according to the anthropologist Inga Clinadine in her book Ambivient Conquest, Mayan and Spaniards in the Yucatan, 1517 to 1570. But few years later, Landa, that's the bishop, betrayed that trust. Accompanied by other church officials, he gathered as many of those books as he could find and burned them. They were full of superstition and lies of the devil, he later wrote. We burned them all, which they regretted to an amazing degree, and which caused them great affliction. The point I'm trying to make is that we're taught that the Native Americans didn't have a language, they didn't have books. We're literally told that these are Native Americans who we know had contact with other races. So you mean to tell me they didn't write down any of their information? They just were completely verbal? No. Literally, this bishop, not the Pope, this bishop destroyed many of these books. And when you do your research, there's only like 5 or 7 codices or codexes are what's only thing left. In your mind, we're told that that's the only thing they had. No. Native Americans had many books and many writings. They were literally destroyed. The only reason that they left those codexes because a lot of that shit basically reinforces the shit that they want, the story that they want out there. And then you realize that there's a lot of similarities between, how do I say this? Other cultures. When you read these codices, you find out like, okay, so the priests wore purple. Well, the priests in Egypt wore purple. Well, these priests over here in the Phoenicians wore purple. But this is in the 1500s. So where did they get purple?
Okay. All right. So let me continue.
Sorry.
All right. So the inhabitants of modern day North America are the 6th root race. So each time a cataclysm happens or some type of catastrophe happens and it wipes out most of that race, the remainder of those people begin and start anew. But that's the next step in psychosomatic physical evolution. Now, in 25,000 years, the 7th root race will be born. So, you also have to see, the crazy thing about all this is that you can't look at history from just a archaeological perspective, because you're only getting a third of the story. Because if you only focus on geology, that's only a third of the story. That's a third of the story, because then there is the spiritual succession, and there are things that are taught orally, because this woman who wrote this book and Isis Unveiled and all these other stories, she had this information passed to her orally from other wise people. Now, the scofflaws out there are the ones who are the science-minded ones and worship at the altar of scientism, and they want everything proven to them. But you're only using one half of your being when you focus like that.
What you're saying is that I only use one of my senses. I'm only using my vision. I'm not using my third eye.
If I go out and I rule the earth and I make everybody wear an eye patch on their left eye, you're not utilizing the full use of your visual properties.
You literally lose your depth perception. You literally lose your
perception.
Ability to,
that's right.
You literally lose that. So what happens when people teach you that there's only one way to see the world, or there's one history, or worse, that many of these histories are actually intertwined? And so, okay, one of the things that we've talked about in past podcasts that gets really, it's hard to talk about because there are people that have, I don't believe this. The word belief is, when you do the origin of the word belief, is be and lie. It means to bring a lie into being. So I really don't like using that word belief. Either you know or you don't know. Either you have. I don't believe in God. I know God, because if you say you believe in God, you're saying that God's a lie, but I acknowledge it anyway. No. So the point I'm making is, when it comes to this belief system, and they even tell you that the system is like, well, you're only part of this. No. Look, the way the Bible's written it's not designed to keep certain races down. It's designed to keep women down. The Bible there's certain shit in the Bible that doesn't even add up. So you mean to tell me, like, the original beings, so a man came first and a woman came second? That don't make sense. Now, let's talk scientifically. There's some evidence out there. There's some crazy evidence, DNA wise, that we find that don't add up. But most of the time when you find these ancient sites, it's mostly women there. Or you even find there's even an island in the South Pacific where everybody's born a woman, and when they turn 7, that's when their genitalia forms. So they don't know that if you're a male or female until you. This is modern day shit. We're not even talking about ancient shit. So some things in the Bible don't make sense, don't add up. And I get it. It's written in unrhymed blank verse. The reason it doesn't make sense is because it's only talking from one point of view, and it's leaving out a lot of shit. And then anytime you try to find this other shit, they literally have book burnings, or you literally have stuff out there so you cannot connect the dots. This shit is designed so you cannot connect the dots.
Okay, all right. So check this out. The truth has been scattered across the globe. If you take some of the teachings that are in Hindu scriptures, the Rig Veda, you look in there and you hear about the Kali Yuga. The Kali Yuga is a galactic calendar that measures the precessions of the planets as they move through the different sections or quadrants of our galaxy that are sectored off by these zodiacal signs: Gemini, Aquarius. These are vectors in the universe, right? These are vectors in the galaxy. But check this out. So it's a clock. Okay, and it's telling you that each time that we're parked in each of these quadrants, that's 12,000 years. All right, so we're moving through this procession. So when this woman is saying that there's another root race coming and it's going to be here in 25,000 years, that's 2 more processions along the clock face or the calendar of the Kali Yuga. Now check this out. So the other way you have to look at this is allegory, because truth is buried in allegory. And in coming from martial arts and Eastern disciplines, I understand the yin and yang. But as you get deeper into the yin and yang, you learn about the I Ching. And you learn that you can go down into the physical body, or you can go up into the great creator, what they call the Wu Wei. Now, you hear this also in Gnostic text. In Gnostic text, all right? So you hear about Sophia, right? And Sophia, and how she, got with the demigod and gave birth to, these beings that would eventually disseminate and become smaller gods. But hang on. So this is a trip right here. So the Christ Sophia, the yin and yang, reflects the perfection of law of gender inherent in the solar logos principle. And so basically it's manifest and it's reflected as a sacred masculine and a sacred feminine, yin and yang, unified, Wu Wei, and made whole, which is made in the true image of the Godhead. Christ Sophia is the path of spiritual ascension that leads to the inner discovery of the spark of divinity that exists within the sacred crystal heart and is found within all of creation. The inner path of Christ, Sophia, is taken through gradual spiritual initiations that are designed to unite polarities that exist between the inner and the outer in the world of forces that alchemically shift in our light body into stages of increasing energetic balance and the union. The inner path of Christ Sophia leads us to seek our own inner wisdom through divine gnosis or divine knowledge.
Okay, so in the Bible, how did the three magi know Christ was being born? Exactly. They knew because the stars told them. And this is the age of Aquarius. Back then, it was the age of Pisces. Pisces, remember, why is Christ the symbol for Christ a fish? It's not because he fed thousands of people.
Because that's the age that he was born in.
Oh my God, see? That's because that's the age he was born in. So when the Catholic Church and these other religious organizations try to do away with all this other sacred information, even they are based on the sacred information because Christ is because he was born under the age of a Pisces. So in the 70s, when they're telling you it's the age of Aquarius, that's because you said 1,200 years. I thought it was 24. Please forgive me. I don't know the cycles. But when you do the research, these cycles exist. And when it tells you it's the age of this, that's because that's what that dominant situation is. And here's another incident. Again, the reason I'm bringing up all these incidents of book burnings because indigenous experts who advise book burnings at the Catholic Church in Canada draw scrutiny. So literally, they're telling you that they had book burnings of, I want to say, a list includes dozens of books of First Nations. First Nations are their Native Americans in Canada. Metis, Inuit, Native American, and Alaska Native leaders, cultures, and stories, and fictional, as well as fictional portrayals. They're trying to downgrade it, oh, this is fiction. We don't know if they're fictional or not because they burnt these books. These books were on deerskin and other forms of old paper. Because also, like I said, we're all told that they never had this shit. Yes, they had it. The Catholic Church burned it. So when you try to acquire these stories, when you sit here and one of the guys we had talked about on other podcasts is Frank Joseph. Frank Joseph he's a Nazi. He is a modern Nazi. There's a picture of this dude at a Malcolm X rally in Harlem, and three Nazis. And so it's crazy because Nazism was about socialism. We'll discuss that later. But the bottom line is this guy is different now, and this guy has done all this research from these island people and all these books about Mu. My brother's telling you about Atlantis and there are other societies that were many, many years old. And like I said, we talked about this in past podcasts.
Okay.
But
let me continue with this, man, because this is some heavy shit, dude. All right. So the goal is to ultimately help us to achieve spiritual freedom through attaining unity with God. When we are at one with God, we exist in the virtue of the Spirit of Christ, emanating the pure love and wisdom consciousness state that is perfected the sacred marriage of Hieros Gamos. Now, Hieros Gamos is the full resurrection of the body to the eternal light of Christ, cosmic Christ consciousness. So, you also hear about heavenly bodies and stories that are metaphors for things that happen on earth. So, one of those is Marduk. Marduk was a being in Mesopotamia, but it's also a planet. Marduk is a satanic hybrid from Annunaki lineage called Omicron. Remember that word? Omicron? That align with Necromaton Niburian forces in order to seize control over the Giza Stargate during the Luciferian rebellion.
That Stargate, is that in Giza or is that the one they found over there in
Giza. There were more than one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wasn't just...
It's about the Great Pyramid, dude.
Yeah. I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
All right.
They talk... These battles that are taking place in the Middle East right now are over ancient shit.
Exactly.
Whenever you try to have a conversation, people... Okay, so if it's not over ancient shit, then why are these Muslims going through destroying altars and statues and shit like that? First things first, something you said earlier, I wanted to comment on. You said some deep shit. You're talking about geography and locations. But first things first, get this shit out your head that the people who live there now are the original people. That is a lie. Stop doing that shit. Stop pretending like these Arabs who inhabit the Middle East now are the original inhabitants of it.
No, the Arab didn't exist, really until about maybe 2,000 years ago.
People will argue with you about that. Look up the blood. Okay, so the old blood type stands for what? Either old or original blood type. That AB blood type comes from that area. So when you find out that AB blood type is only 2,500 years old, what that means is that person originated in a very small area and came outward. That blood type is only 2,500 years old. So a lot of those people have that AB blood type. A lot of people have that argument.
Keep in mind, though, that, what I said earlier, that the Semites, that story is one of the youngest stories.
Yes, that was my point. When Farrakhan said that story is the story of the white man, he's telling you that he's not saying the Bible's not true. He's not saying that the Bible doesn't talk about other people.
He's saying that you are watching somebody else's TV show and you copying somebody's TV show to make that shit your
screen.
Life.
Yes,
like we're all super fans of The Office, basically.
Okay. And so, but like I said, the shit we're saying, it doesn't make sense because if you're looking at it from a point of view of I only know about this, I learned about this. But you got to look at it from a point of view of literally they have book burnings. They literally have information.
They have been hiding stuff from you. That's why I gave that disclaimer at the beginning of the show. But I got to go on, man, because there's some more shit.
Come on.
Marduk, he sent his squad over to the Giza Pyramid to shut down the Stargate during the Luciferian Rebellion. This faction had been primarily focused on the systematic extermination of the Celtic Druid Grail lines by organizing strategic Essene massacres and then tracking, killing, and assuming the identities of former Christ-like beings such as Ezekiel.
He's saying they're literally killing bloodlines off, and then they usurp their identity, saying that my people were these people. This is the point I was making earlier when it comes to the people who live in certain places now are not the people who built the pyramids. The people who live in certain places now are not the people who created this whole thing. They literally usurped that. They killed off the important bloodlines, and then they stuck somebody else in there and said, "Oh yeah, that's Christ's cousin right there," or okay. That's Christ. I'm just breaking down what you're saying. Yep. Please forgive me. Proceed.
Okay, so Marduk controlled an entire succession of Babylonian kings in what is present-day Iraq. They created an empire that settled around the Middle East for gaining control over the main 2D, 4D, and 10D stargates. It is from this timeline that we have non-human hybrid entities connected to this Marduk Omicron bloodline, incarnating as satanic-controlled Middle Eastern users and the power elite global players based on their ongoing genetic modification and grooming them into blood cults. Marduk is also a planetary symbol, aka Nibiru, and he gave this intelligence to Enki and Enlil, who decided he would invade Samaria and play Annunaki god to the humans, and gave his version of accounts to the Anu, and created the human beings, and there they were the gods of this planet. This was a way to create humans as slaves. Somehow, Marduk did this to the Kumaras, who he was showing his anger, who are otherwise known as the Ascended Masters of the New Age, known as Lemuria or Kuthumi, and others. There was some bad blood about the human Orion Wars brought karmically to this planet with this complex situation. Supreme Annunaki Assembly of Lord Marduk is an organization run by Annunaki from the time of the Maldek explosion. So, let me summarize real quick. Marduk is basically a fallen angel, one of the Annunaki. He came to Earth. He came to Earth and enslaved human beings, and he basically controlled a bloodline of kings. And that's how you get the Sumerian kings list, which I will get to in just a moment, and why these motherfuckers lived so long. So, ancient Babylonians, Nibiru is a Sumerian version of the same planetary body, also called Marduk by the ancient Babylonians. It is believed also that some of the Babylonians, the planet Jupiter, represented their god Marduk. Nibiru, or Marduk, was forced into an extreme elliptical orbit of approximately 3,600 years. So that's why you hear about this coming around, and it's known today as the 12th planet in our third dimensional solar system. So you'll hear the name Tiamat, all right? And Tiamat was the mother that gave birth to a lot of these entities. But Marduk, also known as Nibiru, was involved with the deliberate destruction of the planets Tiamat and Maldek. Without Tiamat, we were unable to achieve our 10th chakra, and all its functions work inside our bodies, as she was the frequency link to communicate with our Christ consciousness avatar self. The 10th chakra has lines around our left side, and its main portal is a network from behind the left ear to the crown and to the solar star directly above our crown, about 6 to 8 inches above our head. The destruction of Tiamat, which is a heaven and earth principle ensouled within the planetary Eden, and that creation was representing perfect harmony, this is a woman, is synonymous with the destruction of the sacred marriage of the union of the opposites, and the destruction of the Heros Gamos, this holy wedding, this holy matrimony, home planet Earth. Thus, this timeline represents the fall of the Christ-Sophia union into fragments of Akamoth, and the splitting apart of the male and female consciousness that form the perfect balance of Christ-Sophia, yin-yang. So whenever I say Christ-Sophia, that means yin-yang balance. All right? This destruction manifested itself in a split in the wall in time, and the shift to the patriarchal domination and its electron distortion that was exploited by the false king of tyranny and the imposter spirit of the Na forces. The shift to patriarchy domination was inevitable and planned through the last cycle by draconian Orion groups. However, the levels of destruction of the time matrix nearly took the creation toward the edge of annihilation. And now we come to the Sumerian king list. Now, what I was just talking about there is basically how there was this plan to blind people spiritually, to make them easier to control. So if you can basically put people in a spiritual chokehold where you can't breathe as well, you only breathe in like 10% oxygen. And if you keep that up, you're going to die. So this is what was done to us purposely. And so when you look at these things, when you look at like all that's been done to us, you start to understand that, all right, we were first put into ignorance by these people, these aliens, right? These fallen angels. And then through their underlings, their henchmen, these kings, then everybody on earth that came after that, all the successive generations became weaker and more ignorant because all this information was kept from us. These books were burned. So I want to get to this Sumerian kings list because this shit is insane. All right, so remember, Marduk is the guy. He's the Debo that's controlling these motherfuckers. And so he put his kings into place. He put these guys, into position so he can control all of humanity. This started 452,886 BC. All right? This was pre-creation in the Bible. This is way before the Bible. All right? So, in a sense, all the dates can be pushed back 30 years, symbolic to a month of 30 days, and even 2 years, so 720 days, as the flood in Genesis 11:10 tells us, because, he was on that boat for 30 days. So then in after that time, there was another king, right? So let me jump to the king's list. The times are just insane, dude. Like when you see how these dudes are living for like hundreds of thousands of years, and I'm like, how are they living so long? And people wonder, like, how do people in the Bible live so long? Oh, they just had shitty calendars. No. The people in the Bible lived that long because they were diluted, alien, human, angelic DNA. They were hybrids.
Whether they were hybrids, whether it was diet, whatever, these numbers are not exaggerated. Is the point we're trying to make. Whatever the reason is, that like literally. And the other thing that I think that people don't realize is that if so many parts of the Bible have been proven, so you should be questioning these ages, because like that king's list, Nimrod was on that king's list. Remember, that was a whole big deal when they find this. It's not a tablet; it's like a bell. It had the list of kings on there, and remember they kept saying Nimrod's not on there. And then they find Nimrod because they spelled the name wrong. Remember they had left off the certain letters and all this other shit, and they're finding this stuff. And so the question is, if people were living that long, then what's happening to us now? Why? You said it was because we're diluted, or is it the fact that they know that the longer you live, the more you're going to understand, the more you're going to realize, the more you're going to become a threat to what they put in place. If you realize that this is all bullshit, then you'll rise up against it. Like, hey, nah, man, all that shit that took place in Mesopotamia is bullshit. That shit doesn't have the significance that they're pushing on us.
Okay, but hang on. But if you go back in time, 454,000 years ago, that's when Marduk was wrecking shop, trying to shut everything down, trying to basically handicap humanity so nobody could rise up against him, because they had already had a rebellion in heaven. They're like, look, we don't want these motherfuckers rising up against us. So they were basically being hypocrites. Like, they weren't like, oh, we don't like it up here, we just want to revolt. No, they were shitheads. And so they came to Earth and they were shitty to humans and have been shitty to humans. And that's how we are, the way we are, digging up this shit, trying to get this shit to you through a fucking podcast now. But hang on a second. So let's talk about the king list now for a second, because there was a span of time between when Marduk was doing his thing and before he created his first king to put on the throne. The first guy that he put on his throne, his name was Alulem. This guy ruled 234,000 years ago. His reign was 28,000 years, 28,800 years. Okay, the next guy beneath him, his reign was for 36,000 years. Okay, and the dude beneath him, his reign was for 43,000 years. And then you jump all the way down to the bottom of the list. You get the age of Kish. The age of Kish was for 625,000 years. Sorry, I read that wrong. The age of Kish was for 625 years, but that was 4,600 years ago, 4,600 years ago. So, okay, this is the deal. The age of Kish was where this library was created. And in this library, that's where the most recent writing of this king list was found. These clay tablets that had the king list were in the age of Kish in Ashurbanipal library. So, I know it's a lot of shit. It's a lot of shit, but you also can see why it was so easy to hide this stuff from people. Because this is just business as usual. This manipulation, this suppression has been going on for millions of years. So go back to what I was saying about the root races, okay? And how the first ones were born from the will of God.
Look, real simple. When you look at the pyramids in Egypt and all these ancient sites, you see these platforms that existed before the site existed. You see these stairwells that are huge. You see these openings and doors that are fucking huge. The people that existed before were fucking huge. We're talking about like meters. We're talking like they even talk about these giants being 3,000, some crazy number where these motherfuckers literally walked across the sea floor. That's what they're talking. They're talking about you got giants, you got big giants, little giants, medium giants, all this shit. And every time we read about this shit, we cancel it out in our head like, okay, this is the part where it's not true. But when you find these old stone, whatever you want to call it, whenever you find these old sites, or whenever they find these bodies of these people who are 25 feet tall, the Smithsonian swoops in and just takes that shit. There's a common history out there that's been eliminated on purpose. And one of the reasons it's been eliminated because they want these evil motherfuckers in charge. So they make it seem like the only ancient civilization comes from these evil motherfuckers in Mesopotamia, and everybody else is a derivative of that, when it's just the opposite. There were several other motherfucking societies across this world that beat these motherfuckers down, that won for various reasons. But and that's why this book burning shit is so important, because these tools are out there for you to kill these motherfuckers, to stop these motherfuckers from taking over. But instead, you can't piece it together because that Native American shit, that's not real. Oh, these Africans, they're savages. They don't know shit. These people over here in the South Pacific, they got bones in their nose. They're cannibals. Mind you, the whole time you got white folks eat. They literally used to find mummies and eat them. You do know that, right? I know you know, but I'm posing a question to our listeners. Look it up. Literally, when white folks the reason it's so hard to find mummies and a lot of this shit in Egypt is because when these motherfuckers found them, they ground the bones up and ate the motherfuckers because they thought it would give them something. So, you got people consuming other people, but then, of course, anybody in the South Pacific that does this old tradition, you guys, we're trying to tell you that shit that came out of that Mesopotamia, that this king list, Marduk is the one who was pushing that shit. These are his disciples. They're still to this day controlling a lot of fucked up shit that goes on in this world.
And so now here we are in Mesopotamia, and we're at the time of the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is perhaps the oldest written story on Earth. Now, probably it's well known to a lot of you, but it's written on 12 clay tablets in cuneiform script. And it's about the adventures of a historical king of Uruk, somewhere between 2750 and 2500 BC. So that's 4,700 years ago. And that's around the time of the king, the age of Kish, and the library of Ashurbanipal. So there's a lot of tablets forward. There's even a sequel where there was a guy who volunteered to go back into the underworld to get some of the artifacts that Gilgamesh had dropped in the underworld. So, and this brings us to the law of Hammurabi. The law of Hammurabi was not the first, but it was the most well-known law of the land, and it pretty much usurped all of the tribal laws. So when the Semitic tribes settled in the cities of Babylonia, their tribal customs passed over into city law. The early history of the country is a struggle for supremacy between the cities. A metropolis demanded tribute and military support from its subject cities and left their local cults and customs unaffected. So that's how you had this sacrifices and like blood sacrifices, child sacrifices, and kidnappings that were going on and allowed to happen so long as everybody paid their tithes to the state, paid their taxes. The city's rights and usages were respected by kings and conquerors, and as the late ascension of Ashurbanipal, that was the guy who started the library, and Samasun-Yuking, we find Babylonians appealing to the law, into their city laws, and that the groups of aliens to the number of 20 at a time were free to enter the city. You can use that term however you want. But that foreign women once married to Babylonian husbands could not be enslaved, and not even a dog that entered the city could be put to death untried. The population of Babylonia was of many races from earlier times. Let that sink in. And it was intercommunication between the cities, and it was constant. These cities would like go back and forth. And every city had a large number of resident aliens. The freedom of intercourse must have tended to assimilate custom. So it was, however, reserved for the genius of Hammurabi to make Babylon his metropolis and melt together his vast empire by a uniform system of law. Almost all trace of tribal custom had already disappeared from the law of the code. It is state law, alike self-help, blood feud, marriage by capture. Those don't exist. So it's self-help, blood feud, and marriage by capture cease to exist under the code of Hammurabi. Although family solidarity, district responsibility, ordeal, and lex talionis are primitive features that remain. So these are things that existed before the code of Hammurabi, but he decided to keep those things in. The king is a benevolent autocrat, easily accessible to all his subjects, and willing to protect the weak against the highest placed oppressor. The royal power, however, can only pardon when private resentment is appeased. The judges are strictly supervised and appealed. Appeal is allowed. The whole land is covered with feudal holdings, masters of levy and police. This is a regular postal system. Pax Babylonica is so assured that private individuals do not hesitate to ride in their carriage from Babylon to the coast of the Mediterranean. The position of women is free and dignified. So, that lays out right there what it was like to live in Babylon under the code of Hammurabi. Again, you have to go back very, very far to find out what it was like in the time before the Bible, before the flood, before the Great Fall, and what happened exactly after that, and what Atlantis and Lemuria was actually like.
The Lemuria thing gets complicated because I've been reading the whole time that you're talking, and the same thing that me and you had talked about in the past. They confuse these things together. Now, this one map shows Atlantis being next to Africa and Lemuria being next to in the Pacific in America.
Yes.
Now, some people call Lemuria Mu.
Let me straighten out the Mu thing for you. Okay, so what Mu is how the Aborigines of Australia got onto that island, because there was a huge landmass in the area between Africa and Australia. So what happened was that large landmass that was there was also submerged under the waves of the ocean. But there was a civilization there that existed. So these people... There's proof to this. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. So these people that existed in this time... This is why you got these nappy-haired Negroes in Micronesia. People always wonder, like, how did these people get onto these islands, on Sentinel Island, into Micronesia, Tahiti?
Actually, their culture is very specific. When the Aboriginal people who are in Australia, their culture tells how they crossed. It tells how they came. They can tell you. And here's how white folks, what they say is like, there's that big rock there that's 50,000 years old. No, when look it up. The people who are in Australia, the Aboriginal people, their history goes back 80,000 years, and they were seafaring people. And when they left Africa, they populated those islands. But also, you got another continent that's not there, which is Mu. And these people, there's a DNA strand, they can't figure out where it comes from.
Okay, that's because people are always talking about this map, this alternate map of Australia that shows this landmass that was off the coast of Australia that is not there anymore. Now, maybe this is an alternate timeline reality that's bleeding into this one, where that one is still above the waves, but there is proof that there was a landmass there. And so I'll give you an example. Jacques Cousteau used to have a submarine. It was called Calypso. And he would take this submarine around the island of the Bahamas, deep below sea level. And what he found was caves that had stalactite and stalagmite. Now, that doesn't grow in the ocean.
That grows above ground.
Above water, because there's oxygen, free oxygen that pulls that down like that, and gravity together. So these crystalline formations, these stalactite and stalagmite, were found in caves beneath the waves around the shelf that holds the island, the Bahamas, above the water. And so they then took rock samples of this stone, and they tested it, and they said this stone was dry more than 10 to 12,000 years ago.
Yep. So look, you hear about the guy that's always on Joe Rogan talking about the Great Floods. So there's two Great Floods that we know of. One was 12,000, one was 14,000 years ago.
Carlson.
Randall Carlson, yes, you are correct. But here's where this shit gets complicated. So just when you guys look up Mu, I'm looking at an article right now, the relics of Mu. And it runs it down. It says, it seems most every culture has a legend of a great society ripe with wealth and wisdom, which is lost to the sea. To Westerners, these are the stories of Atlantis or Thule, which I ain't never heard of Thule. I have heard of Thule,
yes,
but I ain't heard of it.
We talked about it.
No.
The Germans, it's their Avalon, it's their Xanadu.
But I never heard of it as a place. I heard of it as a Thule society, that these are the descendants of the Nephilim. But that's some deep shit. But I never heard of it as a place to aspire to go to, is what I'm saying. To many of the people of the South Pacific, it is Lemuria or Menehune. The Asians, it's called Mu, and was a home of people who could fly, who drank an elixir that would cease their aging. After years of searching and combing the Pacific for a possible lost land that could have been the root of one of these legends, it is clear that there is no extra continent in the sea. However, in 1986, a scuba diver at Kichiro Artaki, long story short, those buildings they found on the water next to Japan, diving at the coast of the island of Yonaguni-jima, discovered something that may Yanaguni, lending credence to the existence of Mu or Lemuria. On the seafloor, they found vast geometric structures cut out the rock. So some people try to say that this shit was natural forming. That's all bullshit. And that's why I brought up that Frank Joseph guy. Just when you do his research, these people have been interviewing those people of the South Pacific for years, and they say that society was 150,000 years old. It had three races: a black race, a white race, and a Asian or red man race, and they all ruled equally. But when you find out that they knew about the cataclysm coming, and that their people left, and there's even like written knowledge that people of Easter Island are their descendants. There's all kinds of crazy shit out there. But the point I'm making is that these are much older societies, and these societies were not plagued by these motherfuckers from Mesopotamia. That they were able to deal with them people. Those people are minor evil motherfuckers that have pushed this whole thing across the world, that there was nothing else out there. And when you find, like, literally, they find these Aboriginal people, they find their boats in Antarctica. To this day, they're finding their boats in Antarctica. They're finding that these motherfuckers went everywhere. So that this whole idea that there's one story of history, and that we all got to subscribe to that Mesopotamia is the birthplace of civilization. When you got civilizations much older, you got civilizations that weren't that savage, and you find that these people, they built this great shit, but it got covered up by water. So all of a sudden we're told that it doesn't exist, or it doesn't mean anything, or that's just the way it was cut. That was done by currents. Man, that shit ain't adding up, dude.
Right. But catastrophes hide a lot of stuff. And so when people talk about finding these boats in Antarctica, it's possible that Mu has shifted down south to where Antarctica is now, because people often talk about, Antarctica has the tallest mountains on Earth, and and it has like all this stuff that's underneath the ice, and like these huge caverns that go deep down into like these warm volcanic tunnels.
That's why that younger dryas pole shift shit is so fucking important, or when they talk about that pole shift thing, because they're telling you that literally when that shit goes down, there's usually a major catastrophe. Also, they find, me and you we talked about this in the past podcast, they always keep finding these artificial islands in the South Pacific. And when we say artificial, that literally these are islands that are 5,000, 6,000 years old, but they're not naturally occurring. And they couldn't figure out why these islands existed until they did their research, and they realized, they talked to the native people, and their oral tradition says that we built those islands to stop tsunamis. So they literally built. So the tsunami that happened a few years back, they literally built islands to stop it from happening, because they were that in tune with what was going on. So we know that Mu or Lemuria, whichever the right name is, existed because these people were building stuff years ago to stop cataclysms, to deal with the natural ebb and flow of the earth. They understood that, okay, we have these small islands right here, so we got to protect our people. So, but like I said, but you can look that up. Artificial islands in the South Pacific is a real thing. That's not some shit that just happened recently. And I honestly think that these people were much more in touch than we realize, and that the reason they abandoned the technology, that they're not savages because they couldn't create stuff. They are not savages at all. They decided to get away from this shit because it was fucking toxic.
Yeah. It's crazy, man, because, a lot of these things that we're taught by these institutions that we put all of our faith into, that we believe they're true, that we teach these things as canon. Like, this is the way it is, and this is the way it's going to be, and this is how you should
question
live.
It, you're crazy. You're crazy for speaking up. You're blasphemous. Shut up.
But see, that same type of zeal is what has these people burning books to hide the truth, to hide true history away from people. Because if you can keep the power away from the people, if you can keep their personal power to a minimum, if you keep them convinced that they're just a meat puppet and have them questioning their existence and that they're stuck in this world, if you have them thinking that, then you have control over them. That's why if you look at the plight of the Negro, if you look at how Africans around the planet have been brutally oppressed, but yet the spirit rises above, that soul power will not be crushed. It is something that makes archons and Nazis and Bilderbergs and all these racist ass people so jealous that they don't possess that, because they have been taught to think another way about themselves.
Look, why do they worry about us so much? If we are so inconsequential, and if all these things are just fairy tales, you understand me? Why do you burn the books? Why do you hide the information? If the black man is so low, if the native man is so low,
if you're so superior, then what the fuck are you worried about?
If you're superior, you ain't got to hide shit. You can just like, hey, this is how it is. Instead, you indoctrinate us. You lie to us. You water down our spirit every chance you get. You have us eating not real food. Because here's what, we always talk about Dr. Sebi on here. If we ate the right diet, what could we do? Because here's what I think. I think you have a choice of whether you become enlightened, like energy, or you based on your diet, you become closer to God or closer to animal. As a human being, you have the ability to decide based on what you consume. So if you consume the right fruits and vegetables, not the hybrids, but if you consume the right shit, your third eye is going to open up and you're going to ascend and you're going to recognize, you're going to see auras and shit like that. But if you want to get primal and you want to eat every piece of meat that comes your way, and all of a sudden you become more animal, and your divinity, your third eye closes, and you can't see shit. Because the thing is, when you look at all these different places, whether it's Africa, whether it's India, a subcontinent of Asia, where those Hindis were able to levitate. You know, when the British tried to take over, they weren't taking over that place easily. They were getting their ass whooped. You know what I'm saying? When you go to Africa and you find out that all these different places, how come these warriors who had supposedly had more primitive weapons were able to defeat the British and the French and all this other shit for years and years to come? It took, because they were physically superior, they were mentally superior. So you had to use treachery to take over these lands. And you had a long, and these evil societies, this Illuminati shit, they do the long game. We've seen it. They play the long fucking game, and they sit here and brainwash you.
Okay.
And they have bloodlines.
What's crazy is that you have to dig to find out things such as the first people that were in concentration camps were Africans, not Jews, Africans. In Namibia, in 1909, 1911, 1912, right before the First World War, the Germans were there suppressing, attacking Africans, and committing genocide on the Herero tribe of Namibia. They captured Herero people, men, women, and children, and took them to this island called Cold Wind Island, and it's off the coast of Germany, southeast coast of Germany. They had concentration camps. 72 children were killed. 53 men, 53 women were killed. When you hear about the way they treated these people, there were notes that were taken by British people, British officers that were there as liaisons, and they were using they would starve the people to death so they couldn't eat, and the women that they did allow to eat, they were using them for prostitution. They starved people so much they were emaciated, they could barely stand. There was a story of a woman that was crawling to a group of other enslaved Africans asking for some water, and she was shot in the leg and she was shot in the forearm and left for dead. They left her out in the cold, and she died from exposure and from her wounds. But when you hear about the treatment of these African people in these concentration camps, when you say concentration camps, the first thing that comes to mind is the plight of the Jew and how they were decimated. But they weren't the first. It happened to Africans first. These are all cycles repeating themselves over and over and over. Look for the similarities. Look for what binds all these things together, and look at who is pushing this and why they're pushing this and what existed far before any of this, and how it's really things just come about again and again and again, and just find a way to reunite yourself with your spirit mind, your spirit body, your spirit energy to regain the reunion with the creator of all things. That's all I got. We out. Peace.
Holla back.